Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So today I wanted to do a little tutorial video, and this is build theory. So when you're making a brand new character for the first time, and you want to decide how you're going to build your character, what you're going to do, like what kind of character do I want to make? How do I build the character? What is the correct pathway that you should follow to do your best to make your character into a functional, like workable character? Well, the answer to this question lies in your methodology for creating a character, and it should be a lot simpler than I think a lot of you guys are making it. So if you follow along with me today, I'm going to take you through the process of creating a character, and go over with you my thought process on why I'm making certain choices, and we're going to talk about it. So we're actually going to hop out of Diablo 2 here because, honestly, the best way to build a character is on paper. And what I mean by that is we are going to go to a build planner. Build planners tend to be the best ways to do this, and we're going to go to, I believe, builds.gg seems to be the best one in my opinion right now. That's what it feels like to me. That is not the correct website. I believe it's ggd4builds.gg, yes. Alright, so if we go to the build planner right here, we can choose our build and we can play around with stuff. Now, I'm actually going to build a functional character here, but I'm going to walk you through the process of how it works and what I'm doing. I don't actually have this character in the game yet, so eventually we'll get there. So we're going to build a sorceress today, and I'm going to play around with the abilities, and we're going to see what we can do. So first thing that you do when you are building a character, the absolute first thing you do is you need to decide what your main skill is. So it doesn't matter what is on this board. We don't care like what is on this board. We don't care about all these skills. We don't care about all these passives. We don't care what they do. What we want to decide is what kind of character are we going to be? Now, the easiest way to look at this is core skills. So core skills tend to be the skills that you build around, although you can also build around basic skills. So think about it in terms like this. Which one of the core or basic skills am I going to build my character around? Am I going to build my character around charged bolts? Am I going to build my character around chain lightning, ice shards, frozen orb, fireball, incinerate? Which character do I want to make, right? So I'm going to make a choice right now. Which character do I want to make? I want to make a Charged Bolt Sorceress. So I have made this choice, and my Charged Bolt's going to get maxed out. So I've already made a choice. Charged Bolts is what I want to make, right? Now, from this choice, everything inexorably flows. So if we were to open up a notepad, for instance, and pull that over here, we could write it down like this. All right, so you choose your class. This is obvious. Choose your main ability. This is the ability that everything is focused on, okay? Then, after you've chosen your main ability, what do you do next? Well, it's simple. Support your main ability, okay? So everything from this point, after you choose your main ability, should be the process by which you are supporting your main ability, making it stronger, making it more powerful, finding a way to make your main ability into more than what it is. So how do we do this? Well, we can look at the various abilities throughout the game. We can take a look, first of all, at the two passives. So there are several different things that this particular ability does. Number one, it releases 5 bolts of lightning that course along the ground in an erratic pattern. All right. It has a enhanced charged bolts, hitting an enemy with at least three times with the same cast of charged bolt releases a lightning nova. dealing 24% damage to enemies around them. Now, that sounds to me like we kind of want to be an up-close and personal fighter, because if it's erratic, then standing right in front of the monster will guarantee that all 5 probably will hit him, which means that at least we get 3, and then we get a little lightning nova that comes out, which sounds pretty powerful. And the nova probably comes out from me, I would assume, but it might come out from the monster. But either way, it definitely seems like it does a pretty decent amount of damage, right? Then we have 2 choices. So we have hitting an enemy with charged bolts reduces their damage dealt by 20% for 3 seconds, which is a nice little bump, and could support a close range build. And we also have charged bolts deals 25% increased damage to stunned enemies, which is interesting. And we also have an enchantment effect for Charged Bolt. So Charged Bolt says when you stun an enemy, there is a 40% chance to release 3 Charged Bolts from them. So it seems like to me stuns are definitely the way to go with this, although we could go with destructive Charged Bolts just simply for the ability to obviously survive better. So we get a nice little 20% damage reduction damage reduction to any monster hit by the charged bolts by 20% for 33 seconds, which actually sounds pretty massive because this is not a damage mitigation. So let me explain the difference between this. So if I have a bunch of damage mitigations already, and I apply an additional 20% damage mitigation, it's not going to be as effective as reducing the monster's damage by 20%. If I can reduce the monster's damage by 20% before he hits me, it's actually going to have an even stronger effect on my survivability. So that might be a very interesting way to go. Now, this whole stun enchantment thing does sound very interesting, but we have to find a way to stun the monsters. And according to the Charged Bolt doesn't apply a stun. So how do we get a stun added into this build? Arclash has to unleash arc lightning, damaging enemies in front of you. Every 10 times Arclash swipes, it stuns all enemies hit for 2 seconds. That sounds absolutely beautiful, especially since it's kind of like a close range ability, right? So this sounds like what we're looking for. So we're going to get a free stun every 10 times Arclash swipes. Let's see here. If Arclash's initial swipe critically strikes, it swipes an additional time. Sounds like a very solid build because we can basically just spam this to generate mana, which will stun enemies, which with the enchantment effect will release more charged bolts, which can also potentially give us some interesting damage effects, right? We also have hitting a stun enemy with Arclash reduces my cooldowns, or gain 6% movement speed for 5 seconds per enemy hit with Arclash. I think the cooldown one sounds interesting, but we might switch that depending on whether we run additional cooldowns. Let's take a look at the passive. So after casting a non-basic skill, you gain 2% resistance to all elements. Meh. Additional resistance to that skill's element for 3 seconds. Meh. Your maximum mana is increased. Your core skills have increased damage when cast above 50 mana. So the more mana I have, the better it is, right? Well, it does seem kind of interesting that Charged Bolts releases automatically when monsters are stunned, and Arclash stuns enemies, which could potentially make this rather interesting if this stun enchantment receives the bonus effect from this. So elemental dominance might be worth taking for this particular thing, just simply so that we have, additional damage, basically. We also have the 6% increased damage, but take more damage. That's the glass cannon passive. Critical strikes have a 5% chance to reset one of the cooldowns of your defensive skills. We're definitely, probably, most likely, most certainly, probably, definitely going to take a defensive cooldown. But we probably want to see if we can work in something that's going to stun monsters at the very least, which I don't know if any of these stun. I know Frost Nova, I think, makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, increased to 6 seconds against bosses, which is interesting. But it doesn't give us a stun. Flame Shield can save your life very well. And honestly, at some point, we're probably going to work in a defensive cooldown no matter what, by the way. So, I mean, that's just how it works. But the which one we want to do. I'm not exactly sure. Let's put the defensive cooldown on hold because it doesn't really matter, I hate to say. We'll choose a defensive cooldown at some point. We definitely will have that in the build. But per the guide that we're looking at here, choosing your class, choose your main ability, support your main ability. This is what we're on right now, is support your main ability. We want to make sure that we're supporting this as best as we can. And, I mean, we'll figure out the defensive at some point. We do need to find a way to add more stuns into the build. So we have Lightning Spear stuns enemies for 2 seconds when critically striking, which is interesting. And this is a cooldown. So what we could potentially have happening here is we got stuns from Arc Lash, and then we also have stuns from Lightning Spear. So we could potentially go with a Lightning Spear build, running the Invoked Lightning Spear, and maybe even beefing up the damage. I don't know, so I'm not really sure how important it would be to actually cap that out. But it definitely seems like the stuns could potentially go along very well with Charged Bolt, which would give us more Charged Bolts, obviously, which is what we're looking for. We also have the Lucky Hit here, which may or may not be interesting for this build. I'm not entirely sure if I want to go with a Lucky Hit on the Charged Bolts. Using a cooldown grants you a 10% of your maximum life as a barrier for 2 seconds. Wow, that's kind of amazing. And we'll basically be using that cooldown all the time because it's a 20-second cooldown. So we get a nice little 30% maximum life as barrier for 2 seconds every single time we cast Lightning Spear, which we're going to be casting once every 20 seconds. So a 30% barrier every 8, basically for 2 seconds every 20 seconds. And of course we can reduce the cooldown on Lightning Spear. So we'll see. And we also have Ball Lightning. Does Ball Lightning stun enemies? Ball Lightning does stun enemies. After hitting close enemies 50 times with Ball Lightning, your next cast of it stuns enemies hit for 1 second. Every time you stun an enemy, you deal 15% increased lightning damage to them. So this goes along with the enchantment, which is when you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release Charged Bolts. So what we're going with here is we're trying to make it so that the stunned enemies are getting more damage as well. So that is a no-brainer for this particular build. We're probably going to have crackling energies all over the place, so it might not be a bad idea to take Invigorating Conduit, but we'll think about that later. We can also stack this one if we want to stack this one. So Lucky Hit, critical strikes with shock skills have a 5% chance to form a crackling energy. The crackling energy thing I'm kind of interested in, but I'm also kind of not. I do eventually want to do a crackling energy build, but I'm not sure this one is going to be it. We also have Coursing Currents. Hitting an enemy with shock skills increases your critical strike chance by 1%, resets upon getting a critical hit. That doesn't sound bad, especially considering that we have this one, which is Lightning Spear stuns enemies for 2 seconds when critically striking, right? So this would potentially make sure that Lightning Spear is getting the stuns off and making sure that the charge bolts are coming out of the character, right? So very, very nice. Critical strikes with shock skills increase your movement speed. Not really sure about that one. Enemies deal 5% less damage for 5 seconds after being critically struck with your shock skills. Lucky Hit, shock skills have up to a 3% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds. So again, we're going with the stuns, so we definitely want to cap that one out, the convulsions. This one actually is kind of nice, so we're probably going to pump some points into that one as well. Unstable Currents is actually kind of amazing, and it's probably going to be worked into the build. I think that Unstable Currents is kind of like a no-brainer for this particular build, so we're probably going to go ahead and snag that. So right now we currently have, and if we go over to the gears and skills, we can set this up. So we currently have our Charge Bolts as our main ability, Arc Lash as our builder. We currently have Unstable Currents as our ultimate. And then we have Lightning Spear as a cooldown, which is just basically so that we can get more stuns. And we are still currently open with 2 slots, which is perfectly fine because we're probably going to end up using one of those for teleport and another one for a defensive cooldown. So it's probably going to be something like teleport ice shield or teleport flame shield or something along those lines, something to save our lives, some sort of unstoppable. Teleport probably just simply because of some movement ability. Which is really nice. And then our enchantments are probably going to look something like this. So we're probably going to have Charged Bolts as our enchantment slot, which is when you stun an enemy, there's a 40% chance to release their charge bolts from them. And then this other one, I'm not entirely sure. This one is Lucky Hit. Critical strikes have a 25% chance to spawn a static ball lightning. I wasn't super impressed with the ball lightning in the previous beta. So I don't entirely know if the ball lightning is going to be the most amazing thing in the world. We could go with ball lightning, maybe, but I'm not sure. As for the capstone, we've got 2 lightning capstones. One of them is the crackling energy capstone, which I don't think we're going to go with. And the other one is the close enemies take 10% increased damage from your shock skills and deal 20% less damage to you. Critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. So this one goes along with what I was talking about earlier, which is Charge Bolts is more of a close range skill. Like you kind of want to get up and personal, right? So this supports the up and personal style by giving you a damage reduction. Essentially when you're hitting things, and increases your damage as well, and also allows you to increase those bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds if you crit. So this is a crit close build, essentially. It has lots of stuns attached to it, so the monsters are going to be stunned all the time, which is very, very useful. And it doesn't really seem like crackling energy is going to work its way into this build all that much. We may or may not want to grab the Lucky Hit passive anyway, though, because some of this stuff is Lucky Hit, like the Lucky Hit shock skills have a 9% chance to stun enemies. So we want as many stuns as we can possibly get because of the way that this enchantment works. We want to make sure everything is being stunned all the time. So Lucky Hit is going to support Charge Bolt by supporting the stun effect, right? So this is just another way that we can support the main ability. Everything that we're doing is supporting our main ability, making our main ability better in some way, shape, or form, right? Now, if we go and look, we still have 13 skill points, so we could maybe beef up Arc Lash. I hear Arc Lash is actually pretty good, so like I don't really think that that one's a terrible one. In fact, it also increases the stun duration, so might be a good idea to beef up our Clash. There's still a lot of other things in here that we can definitely play around with to optimize the build. But let's look at our last enchantment slot. So there's a lot of different choices for enchantment. This one right here, which is direct damage from skills, applies an additional 23% burning damage over 8 seconds, can be very interesting because it offers the ability to have massive regeneration, which can allow us to get the charged bolts. If I remember correctly, in here there is a... where is it? Killing a burning enemy increases your mana regeneration by 10%. And of course, you can get that up to 30%. So in this particular case, we can set it up so that the monster is burning by grabbing this passive, which allows basically all skills to apply burning damage. Then, by grabbing this particular passive right here, we are now getting a 30% mana regeneration for 3 seconds every single time we kill a burning enemy. So we get a pretty nice mana regen bump all the time. And we could potentially take one or more of these other passives. It just doesn't really matter. Like, every 1 second you heal for 0.3% of your maximum life for each nearby burning enemy. Might not be absolutely terrible. And then you also have this one, which gives you increased damage to burning enemies. So this one actually is not bad, and neither is this one. They're actually both kind of good. So this is going to constantly make the monsters burn. If you take a look at this, it's basically just an 8-second burn. which means if we go back over here and we look at this skill is going to give us a 5%, up to 5% after 5 seconds. So that means we'll always get a 5% bonus, and if we bump that up, we can get 15% bonus from the damage of them burning, and they're always going to be burning because this is basically going to make all skills apply burning damage. So it's going to be pretty effective to both give us regeneration and also bump up our damage a little bit, so we might as well tag that as well. This one for the heal might also support our build, so we're going to grab this one for right now. Actually, you know what? Oh, wait, what am I talking about? We didn't grab our defensive skill. We need to go grab our defensive skill. So first off, let's go ahead and grab teleport, which we're going to go ahead and grab the defensive teleport, which is definitely one that we're interested in. And then we're going to pull some points out of our clash so that we can grab our defensive skill. Now, I personally had a lot of fun with ice armor, but not really 100% sure about that one. We'll have to play around with this. Chance to become frozen. Damage against vulnerable enemies contributes 50% more to Ice Armor's barrier. Now that's something that we didn't actually consider in this build, which is basically that we need a vulnerable added into the build. We need some way to make the monsters vulnerable because pretty much every single build needs to have some way to make the monsters vulnerable. And the sorceress, as far as I can tell, does she even have a vulnerable option? She has flickering frostbolt, which can make the enemy vulnerable for 3 seconds. We've got nothing there, nothing here. Charged Bolt doesn't make the enemy vulnerable. So let's, before we go changing the build and how it works, let's take a look at the gear and skills, and let's see if there's any aspects that can help us with vulnerable. I really doubt it. But the Necromancer has one, so let's take a look. You take 25% less damage from, that's not going to help us out any. So that was, I think, the helmet slot. Let's check the glove slot. Aspect of the biting cold. When you freeze an enemy, there is a 20 to 35% chance that they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. Storm Swell. You deal 20% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. Let's check the ring slots. Same ones. Let's check the amulet slots. Nothing good there. Let's check the weapon slots. So it looks like we're kind of up the creek without a paddle, so to speak. But before we go into all that, let's take a look at charged bolts. So we've got 2 different effects here. We've got your cast of charged bolts have a 25% chance to be attracted to enemies and last 300% longer. We also have the Staff of Lam Asem. Charged bolts pierce, but deal 35 to 25% less damage. Piercing charged bolts sounds amazing. That's probably going to be what we're going to use for this particular build. So that would be interesting. Also, since that other charged bolt aspect is probably our second best aspect, which is the one that allows the charged bolts to be attracted to enemies and last 300% longer, that one's probably going to go on the amulet unless the damage output doesn't increase. So that's an interesting one. Let's go back to the skill tree real quick, and let's think about how we're going to get our vulnerable out of this particular build. So, I mean, we don't necessarily need teleport, although teleport is really nice. One way that I know that we can work vulnerable into this build is the Frost Nova. Frost Nova does have a 4-second vulnerability with a increase to 6 seconds against bosses. So that's one way that we could potentially add in a vulnerable into the build. It does kind of work well with the close nature of the charged bolts because you got to get up inside their face, and you're going to be spamming a lot of abilities, so why not have this as well? We also have Frozen Orb, I think, has vulnerable on it. Frozen Orb's explosion has a 30% chance to make all enemies hit vulnerable for 2 seconds. Frozen Orb always makes frozen enemies vulnerable, so that's an option. The unfortunate side effect of that is it's 2 core skills, and core skills generally don't work very well together because they both burn essence. Can't really run 2 core skills at the same time, unfortunately. Another option, I'm trying to remember, I think there's the 40% chance to make them vulnerable for 2 seconds. Interesting. So Ice Blades can make the enemies vulnerable. And it looks like they make the enemies vulnerable quite a bit. The cooldown can be reduced quite considerably. It looks like we could also utilize this to reduce the cooldown on Lightning Spear, according to what I'm seeing here. So basically, we would choose this one right here, which is 20% chance, or 20% of Enhanced Ice Blade's cooldown reduction is applied to my other skills. I have a 40% chance to make enemies vulnerable, and this would also reduce the cooldown on Lightning Spear as well as the cooldown on Ice Blades, which could potentially keep vulnerable up quite a bit. That doesn't seem like a bad choice. And if we're going down this road with the conjurations, we could choose Conjuration Mastery, which wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing in the world, because it does give us enhanced damage for every conjuration active. So if we're going to have lightning spears and ice blades active on a regular basis, that could potentially give us a pretty nice little damage bump. And then we got our lightning spear is already up there. We need to put our ice armor up there, of course. So we're looking something like this, which basically how it's going is we're trying to support the charge bolts. We're supporting that by having the enchantment for charge bolts. We're supporting the charge bolts by getting the fire bolts to have the enhanced regeneration, so we can spam more charge bolts. The lightning spear is going to be stunning enemies, which is going to help us quite a bit. We also have more stuns coming from that kind of thing, which is definitely very interesting. Let's take a look and see if there's any nice lightning spear affixes. So let's go spear, nothing on the boots, spear, nothing on the pants. Aspect of Splintering Energy. Lightning Spear has a 20% chance to spawn an additional Lightning Spear when you cast it. That seems like kind of a no-brainer. That one is Gloves, Offhand, One-Handed Weapon, Two-Handed Weapon, Ring, and Amulet. So that one is probably going to end up going on the Gloves, because that's going to give us more Lightning Spears. More Lightning Spears means more stuns. More stuns means more Charged Bolts. More Charged Bolts means more damage. Let's take a look at the chest. We are using ice blades, so it would be interesting to check and see if there's any ice blades. Casting ice armor makes you unstoppable for 2 to 3 seconds. That's probably one that we want to put on the helmet. So we're probably going to grab that so that we get our unstoppable with our ice armor, which is certainly not a bad idea. And then what do we want for boots? Let's just take a look at the boots and see what we've got. Your lucky hit chance is increased by 10 to 20% while you have a barrier active. That sounds absolutely amazing. And the reason why I'm thinking of that is because ice armor is going to give us a barrier, right? So every single time we use ice armor. And then we also have this passive, which gives us stuns, depending on the fact that we have a lucky hit. So a 9% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds, right? So we're running this one to enhance our lucky hit chance so we can get more stuns. We're running the aspect here, which is going to give us more lucky hit chances so that we can get more stuns, as long as we have a barrier active. So we got another bonus to our lucky hit chance. For resource aspects, we're probably going to be using... trying to remember here. Your mana regeneration is increased by 10 to 20% if you have not taken damage in the last 3 seconds. That's not going to work for us. We're going to be a close-up sort of a character, so... That seems kind of nice. Aspect of control. You deal 25 to 35% more damage to enemies that are immobilized, stunned, or frozen. Then, of course, we're going to be stunning monsters on the regular. Casting a basic skill reduces the mana cost of your next core skill by 10 to 20%. That seems kind of nice. That might actually be nice, considering we're going to be spamming Arc Lash to then spam Charged Bolts. The Avalanche Key passive now applies to 1 additional cast. Frozen Orb stays in place. While Ice Armor is active, you leave behind exploding ice spikes that deal X damage, or ice spikes chill enemies. 5 to 10% increased damage for each second you stand still. Overwhelming Currents. Currents has a 10 to 20% chance to cast an additional shock skill. We are going to be using Currents, so that could be an interesting one. That one looks like gloves, offhand, one-hand weapon, two-hand weapon, ring, and amulet. So unfortunately, it's only available for the ring. Huh. We also have the Umbral one, which could be interesting. Just kind of like going over them, taking a look at all of them, kind of soaking it in. Just seeing what we can do. Skills that deal up to 20% increased damage based on your primary resource. That's not going to be good for us. Core mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana. Gain 40% increased critical strike chance. Ball lightning orbits around you, but its damage is decreased by 20 to 10%. Hmm. Veer's Mastery Key passive damage reduction is increased by 20 to 30% for each close enemy, up to 60 to 90%. The Mage Lord's aspect. Wow, that seems kind of interesting. Is Veer's passive the one that we chose? It is. Veer's Mastery. So this would increase our survivability within close range and also increase our damage. Our damage reduction is increased by 30% for each close enemy. So basically, it would just allow us to get in there and actually fight, which sounds absolutely amazing because this is going to be a close range fighter. I'm also considering the efficiency one, but let's go a little bit deeper. And let's just make sure we've got everything. While Unstable Currents is not active, your shock skills have a 5 to 10% chance to trigger a free cast from it. That sounds absolutely amazing. Especially since we're going to be running Unstable Currents, which has a 70-second cooldown, by the way. So it's kind of a long one. And getting a free cast of it at a 10% chance definitely does not sound awful. Unstable Currents, if you're unaware of how it works, it basically just randomly spams all sorts of skills like Lightning Spear, Arc Lash, Charged Bolts, like all of the lightning spells basically can be randomly cast, including Ball Lightning and all the others, which allows you to just get a massive amount of damage all the time. But a free cast of this on a regular basis kind of sounds insane, to be honest. Let's find some aspects for our chest armor. So is this a wand or a staff? It's a staff. Okay, so this is a two-handed staff. It does have mana on kill on it, which is definitely kind of nice. Let's take a look at the chest aspects and let's see what we want to use. We actually did not use teleport, but it looks like to me it stuns enemies. Look at that. After using a teleport, close enemies are pulled to you and stunned. Well, we gotta use that then. Like, you kidding me? Like, this entire thing is built around stunning enemies, and this is basically a free stun, which will emit a 40% chance to give 3 charged bolts as every single time we are stun a monster. So this is, like, crucial to the build then, which means that we have to put teleport into the build. Um, well, this is interesting. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to manage that. I mean, I guess we don't. We need this for the vulnerable. We need this for the barrier. But then again, can we get away without a defensive cooldown? I don't really know if we can. Teleport definitely needs to be our defensive cooldown, it seems like. So we may have to just simply remove the ice shards, ice armor from this. Now, one of the things that I'm thinking here, and this may or may not work, but is basically this. Teleport does have a damage reduction. Veer's Mastery does have a damage reduction. We also have this massive damage reduction coming from the stable, or the Mage Lord's aspect, which is giving us basically a 90% damage reduction for all the enemies that are close to us. So when we teleport in, we should technically get a 90% damage reduction for all the monsters that have been pulled in with this particular ability. Oh, thank you, Tony. So it should work out that maybe we don't need the defensive cooldown of ice armor, and instead we can go with the teleport. It's on an 11-second cooldown, so we'll be able to stun monsters for 2 to 3 seconds every 11 seconds, which certainly doesn't sound awful. So basically, we're going to pull them in, we're going to stun them, cast charge bolts from them at a 40% chance, which is a pretty good amount. And also, I mean, we also have a 10% chance to trigger unstable currents all the time, so you never know. We also have the Arc Lash, which seems to do a pretty decent amount of damage. Let's take a look at our pants, and let's see what we're looking for pants. I was thinking maybe we could go with this Aspect of Might, which is the basic skills, give you a 20% damage reduction. This could further remove our need for a defensive skill. Because we got the defensive skill bonus here. We've got the Veer's Mastery. I'm not really 100% sure how this is going to work out, but we'll see. On top of this, we could go with other ways to get a barrier, like when damaging an elite, you gain a barrier, things like that. I'd definitely like to work a barrier in somewhere, for sure. Just trying to take a look and see what else is on the list. I mean, Temerity could be an interesting way to just simply add a barrier into the build if we wanted to, but I don't know if that's really the best way to go. I feel like the Aspect of Might is probably our best bet here, because then we're running a 20% damage reduction from the Aspect of Might. We've got the Aspect of Veer, which has a 20% less damage from you. So close enemies take 10% increased damage from your shock skills and 20% less damage from you. Or deal 20% less damage to you, and then critical strikes increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. But then on top of that, we also have this one, which is going to increase the damage reduction for every enemy that is close by up to 90%. So with all of that running, we should be pretty tanky, I would imagine. I mean, we are relying on Ice Blades to give us our vulnerable, but I don't know if that one's actually going to be worthwhile. We may have to go with, instead of Ice Blades, we might have to go with Frost Nova. Because Frost Nova does have a 4-second massive vulnerability, whereas Ice Blades is just simply going to be attacking, like for 6 seconds. So every 16 seconds, we'll get 6 seconds of vulnerability, essentially, on the monsters that are currently around. It does have the ability to reduce its own cooldown every time it hits a vulnerable enemy, so there is that. But Frost Nova can hit basically everything within range and make everything vulnerable for 4 seconds. which it can do every 24 seconds. We could also potentially, I think there's a legendary affix that has to do with Frost Nova. I think if I check, Frost Nova gains an additional charge, but the cooldown per charge is increased by 40 to 30%. So you could potentially go with an additional charge here. All this is really about is trying to get our vulnerability into the build. And if we can't get the vulnerability into the build, then it's not going to work out. Just as an experiment, though, let's take a look at some of the other enchantment effects. Just see if there's anything else in here that could potentially be useful for us. Evade is replaced with a short-range teleport on a 17-second cooldown. So I have thought about this, and this is kind of interesting to consider. So if we go with the teleport here instead, unfortunately that would mean we would lose the mana regeneration, which is unfortunate, but we could then salvage those points for something else, which may or may not be useful to us. But here's what I'm thinking with this. So if we go with the teleport instead, we utilize the boot aspect here. Where is it? Actually, we don't even need this one anymore because we're not running a permanent barrier, so we need to go with a different one. But basically, on the actual boots, there is an aspect that can give you +3 to your charges. So +3 evade charges, right? So the idea here is that we are going to get a 4 teleport setup. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to teleport in, pull everything in, stun it, right? Teleport, pull everything and stun it. Teleport, pull everything and stun it. Teleport, pull everything and stun it. We can get 4 charges on our boots, which means that we can potentially get 4 stuns added into the build, which will take advantage of the Charged Bolt. When you stun an enemy, it emits Charged Bolts. So the whole entire purpose of this build is to stun enemies, cause Charged Bolts to come out, and stun enemies some more and charge bolts. Hopefully by the time we're done with this, there should be charge bolts just shooting everywhere all across the screen, just hitting every single monster within range to the point of absurdity, right? And if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We can always modify it and see if we need to add in more survivability or see if we need to take some survivability out and add in more damage. But there's definitely 100 different ways you could go with this. But I think what we have here is a pretty solid base for a build. And then we go to the Paragon board, and the Paragon board is going to be all about supporting that build. So getting things like bonuses to damage, utilizing specific glyphs that can help you out. So like if we go through the glyphs, we can take a look at some of these. And one of the ones that you definitely want to use on just about every build is the exploit glyph. Which gives you the dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy, increases your damage. Like it's just something that you're going to want to add into pretty much every character. Doesn't really matter what character you are, you usually end up using an exploit glyph. But let's explore the legendary boards before we actually look at some of this other stuff. So what do we got? Stunning a close enemy restores 10 mana. Well, I think we just solved our mana problems, right? Because what are we going to be doing all the time? Stunning enemies, right? Raymond of the Infinite gives us massive amounts of ability to stun monsters. We have tons of other stuns that are coming in. So we have lots of ways to restore our mana on a regular basis. So amazing, 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 amazing. We're going to get that stunning close enemies. Definitely. Let's take a look at some of the other ones. We've got your enchantments are 20% stronger. That sounds really powerful. Your conjuration skills have a 5% reduced cooldown or mana cost per conjuration skill you have equipped. Sounds pretty nice considering we're using 2 conjuration abilities. Ceaseless Conduit, Crackling Energy has a 25% chance to not consume a charge. We're not doing a Crackling Energy build, so that was not important for us. So instead of... honestly, we've got 2 of them here that seem like they could be pretty good. We're definitely building an enchantment build, but I also really like the conjuration thing because we're going with double conjurations. So first, let's go with the enchantment one, which I feel like is going to be pretty strong for our particular build. And then we will go with the elemental summoner, which is going to get us the conjuration skills have 5% reduced cooldown. And then let's take a look at some of the glyphs that we can throw on these boards. So we've got tons of different glyphs in here. The sorceress has some pretty interesting ones. Whenever you chill an enemy, not what we're interested in, you take reduced damage. Uh, you take reduced damage the less mana you have, up to 13.3%. After spending 50 mana, you deal 6.7% increased damage and gain 6.7% increased mana regeneration for 3 seconds. That's magic nodes. Burning damage, damage reduction against close enemies. I think that's one that we may be very interested in there because we're going to be doing a lot of close damage. So territorial seems like a very nice one. Let's take a look at some of the other ones. Casting a defensive skill, reduction when you have an active barrier, pyromancy, potion healing, chilled targets, flame feeder, not what we're interested in. For each skill equipped in your enchantment slot, gain 13.3% resistance to that skill's element. No. It's kind of a weird one. It does have a 1.3% increased non-physical damage, but I don't know about that one. Electrocute. Your lightning damage has a 5% chance to increase... A 5% increased chance to critically strike enemies who are stunned, immobilized, or frozen. Absolutely. That is 100% what we're looking for. Stunned. That's what we want. Destruction. Critical strikes increase all damage the enemy takes from you by 2% for 10% up to 12%. Core skills deal 2% increased damage. Critical strike damage. Slower chilled enemies. 20% increased damage to stunned or frozen enemies. That sounds interesting. Control, definitely. Sounds interesting. Conjuration skills have 20% increased duration. That one sounds very important for our build. We want those things staying up as long as possible. Conjuration skills gain 2% increased damage. I'm not really concerned about the damage, but the longer they stay up, the more they're making things vulnerable, and the more they're making things stunned. So that actually does seem pretty nice. Again, supporting my build. Overall, I think the build is really interesting. We could, of course, go through the Paragon tree, but I don't think that's really all that important. I'd like to actually put this character into practice at some point. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to show you how to build a character, not build a character for you. The methodology that you follow. And I think that once you understand what it takes to build a character, as far as like choosing your aspects, choosing, the specific ability that you're going to be using, supporting that ability in every way that you possibly can, you start to realize that it's actually pretty easy to figure out, like how the build is going to function, because it's really just a matter of, pressing the right buttons and getting everything set up. I mean, you gotta like just work down the list, and it works for anything, not just charge bolts, of course. If I want to make a ice shard sorceress, or if I want to make a fireball sorceress, or if I want to make even an incinerate sorceress, it doesn't matter. Your goal is to support that ability in every way, shape, and form, and take advantage of how that ability works. And once you start to do that, the build kind of just forms around you. Now, I will have this build linked for you guys. Let me just go ahead and save this before I forget. And I'm probably going to be doing... Actually, I don't think I have Fortify in this particular build, do I? So probably going to be topazes or rubies, one or the other. And then, of course, skulls. So let's go ahead and save this. And this is going to be the Charged Bolt Sorc. And we're going to go ahead and create that. And I'm going to copy a link. And we're going to put that in the video description. So if you guys want to check it out, it'll be in the video description. Overall, when it comes to builds... I think the most important thing for you to remember is, follow the list of things that you're trying to do. Choose your class. Choose your main ability. Support your main ability in every way possible. And I feel like I need to put this in every way possible. The whole goal of building a character is to make sure that the thing that you've chosen can actually do what you need it to do. Don't spread all your points out. Okay. What I mean by this is like you can't just have like points everywhere, all over the place, doing anything that you want to do. Like you can't just you can't just like pick say like Charged Bolt and then also have like Frozen Orb and then also have like Incinerate and then also have like you have to focus on what it is that you want to do, otherwise you're never going to get anywhere. So if you use this, focused point of view, you start to understand things a lot better. Then comes to vulnerable. You need to have vulnerable in the build. So make sure that you have vulnerable. You have to have some sort of vulnerable to build. Vulnerable is just very, very important as far as damage output goes. And if you don't have vulnerable in the build, it's not going to work out very well for you. Going even further than that, we can talk about some of the other things. So defensive cooldown. You definitely need to make sure you have some kind of defensive cooldown. All right. In my particular case, my defensive cooldown is actually my ultimate. So I'm going to be relying on not my ultimate, my capstone. So my capstone, I'm going to be relying on that to help save my life because it does a lot of damage reduction. And the more monsters I have around me, the more damage reduction I get. And hopefully I will be defensive enough to survive most stuff. But I don't really 100% know. So until I actually get in the game and play around with this, it's whatever. Aspects need to support your build. Okay. So once you have supported your build in every way possible with your skill points, right? Then you need to support your build in every way possible with your aspects. And that goes for things like, your static cling, your mage lord's aspects, your stable aspect, your raven of the infinite, your staff of Lama Sim. Your character needs to be supported in every way possible that you can. Refine the build. Okay, so this is the last step, and this is very important. Nothing works out exactly as you expect it to the first time that you expect it to. Okay? You have to remind yourself and remember that you're going to have to make small adjustments here and there. Maybe something that you planned to work out doesn't work out. Maybe it didn't give you enough stuns like you wanted, or maybe it just wasn't the ability that you wanted to choose and you want to change everything out. But you have to go through a process of refining the build. And refining the build is definitely a process. So let me actually write that here. A process of refining the build. This process is very important, and it's where things change. It's where your initial expectation for the build might not have been correct. Where you might adjust, change things out. Let me give you some examples. Conjuration might not work out for me. I don't know if it's going to. Ice Blades might not give me enough vulnerable like I like it to. My teleportability might not work out quite as well as I want to. Maybe I need another defensive cooldown in here. There's 100 different ways this could go wrong. But like, say for the Ice Blades, that's my vulnerable. Well, if I utilize Frost Nova instead of Ice Blades, maybe the vulnerable from Frost Nova could be a better choice for my particular build. I don't know. But we have to test it out. We got to find out. We got to see how effective things are. Also, maybe I might want to put more points into Arclash. so that Arc Clash is maxed out. It seems like I'm going to be using Arc Clash a lot, depending on how the build rolls. Charged Bolts is definitely going to need like a lot of points, so I might even get even more points into Charge Bolt than I could possibly get otherwise, like maybe on my gloves or whatever. The build does incorporate critical strike, but it also incorporates a lucky hit, and so it's kind of interesting that it's kind of both. So I'm not really sure if that's going to work out because lucky hit and critical strike are not, I don't want to say they're mutually exclusive, but it's definitely a lot harder to build lucky hit and critical strike as opposed to just simply building crit or just simply building lucky hit. But I do have ways to support both of those, which is interesting. Unstable currents is really powerful, but who knows? Maybe I go with a different one like deep freeze, just so I can freeze everything as a survivability or something. Or maybe instead of going with lightning sphere, I go with ball lightning, and then I change out to, say, the aspect that allows ball and lightning to like rotate around me in a circle, which does seem rather interesting, especially for a close damage character. Could be quite powerful. I'm not really exactly sure how well that would work out, but it does sound really interesting to have the lightning, rotating around me in a circle. That could be a refinement that I may make to this particular build, is instead of going with lightning spear, which stuns enemies, I could instead be going with ball lightning, which stuns enemies. And I don't know how I feel about that one because it's a mana cost. It's a 50 mana cost. It's pretty hefty. Whereas Lightning Sphere is a cooldown. Basically, what I'm thinking in my mind is that I'm going to be spamming Charge Bolts more than anything else, and that's my mana cost ability. So everything else being a cooldown isn't necessarily terrible. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that I can probably still keep Ice Armor in the build. I think when you choose this enchantment, you don't actually have to have teleport on the bar. I think it just goes to your evade, right? So it just goes to your evasion, which means that we should technically be able to still bring Ice Armor into the build as a defensive cooldown, which certainly doesn't seem terrible. We could do it damage against vulnerable creatures. Let's do this one because we do have vulnerable, and it could work out nicely that way. We could even stack this up a little bit higher. Why not? So we can get a decent barrier out of it. I don't know. As you can see, I'm already trying to make refinements. I already kind of messed up the way that teleport works, so I was kind of like not paying attention to the fact that teleport would take the place of evade, which means I probably don't need it on the bar. So that's interesting. Overall, I think this character is going to be pretty powerful, but I want to get into the game and actually test it, and that is the next step. So after you have designed your build, you need to get in the game and test it. This is the before the process of refining your build, obviously. So once you get into the game and actually make it, and you start to see how the skills work, you start to play with how how things interact with each other. That's when you get a better idea of how you want to refine the build. This video has already been an hour long, and I don't want to take like too much longer. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when it's just me going on for like an hour on the build process and how you can create your characters. And if you have any questions on creating your own character, I'll be happy to try and help. But I always encourage you guys out there to just have fun making your own characters. Play around with different ideas. You don't always have to go on these YouTubers' websites and like pull off build guides and copy what they're doing. Making your own original builds is half the fun. So as always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.